At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
This podcast is brought to you by TeamTrade, a digital solution that helps you hire, optimize, and retain employees. Using psychometric assessments to identify more than 100 professional mindset traits, it gives instant reports you can use to build high-performing teams. Get 2 free profiles today, no commitment, no credit card required, at teamtrait.com. TeamTrait.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
Lee, we've had the difficult conversation topic on this show. Now we're going to zero into the inside bullseye points thing on the dartboard, which is not just difficult conversations, but I disagree with you. Difficult conversations.
So one of my leadership coaches in my past, we talked about at the moment of assignment is when this is most critical, because you want your people then to feel comfortable in saying, I disagree, with that, or where it's I have a different idea about that. And they need to feel comfortable about that before they, go out then and execute, directive that you've given them. It's they need to be able to push back on that respectfully. But you don't want them to feel so comfortable where you gotta say, boss, you're full of crap. It's you don't know what you're talking about, or something like that. That would be disrespectful. So, and then of course, then I was taught then after that, we've had that discussion, whatever, we all need to get on the same page and we all need to execute, whether or not we have individual disagreements or not. But it's this is the moment, though, where they need to feel comfortable to disagree, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And that's what I can't wait to hear about today.
Can't wait for this guest. I've been looking forward to this all week. Manage Smarter podcast, everyone. Welcome. Come on in, sit down, put your feet up for the fastest 20 minutes. And
unless you're driving, don't do that. If you're driving, don't do that.
My name is Audrey Strong. I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications here at SalesFuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I'm the CEO and founder of SalesFuel.
All right. So our guest today, he says he's more comfortable in hiking boots than in house slippers. He's a high-octane daddy of 2, Justin Jones-Fosu. And when he's not summiting life's metaphorical mountains, he's trekking around the world. We had a mountain climber on here recently. You'll hear her on the show in the coming weeks as well. He's done Mount Kilimanjaro, Patagonia, camped in the Grand Canyon, and he's also been to Machu Picchu, that city. Is that in Peru, Justin?
It's Peru,
yes,
right?
That's Peru.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, I know my geography. As the founder and CEO of Work Meaningful, Justin delivers 50 to 60 talks a year. The book is called Go Out and Get It. I respectfully disagree. How to have difficult conversations in a divided world, a guide for the modern day social explorer, charting a path through the rocky terrain of tough conversations at work. It might even work for your marriage too, right?
Oh yes, it's worked for mine. So
thanks,
let me ask
Justin.
my wife real quick.
Welcome. So
I know I'm wrong, but I respectfully disagree.
I disagree, honey. What in the world was the catalyst that lit the flame to write a whole book on disagreements and how to approach it?
Yeah, it was working in my sessions. So I'd often do these full sessions, and I'd make this statement, and we were talking with organizations around kind of how do we create these cultures of belonging, where people feel included. And I would always make the statement that we can vehemently disagree with someone's ideology and yet still passionately pursue their humanity. And there was always this kind of audible gasp in the room, like that's interesting. And then people would come up over and over again and like, I love that quote. And they ask 2 things, but how do I do it? Or they would ask, but what if they believe this? And so this became a response, just listening to our customers and our clients of what they continue to ask for. And that's why we decided to embark upon this book. I had no desire or intention to write this book, but the audience asked for it.
Yeah.
Let's just jump right into it. Like, so how do you disagree without being disagreeable? To use that old phrase, or like for example, I saw that you wrote an article about this for Oprah. So it's like, what are some of the tips that you can provide, for exactly doing that?
Yeah. So one of the things that we actually want to take a step back, because a lot of our research, we found that most of the books on conflict resolution or having these types of conversations dealt with the conversation. It dealt with when you're in a moment, do you take a breath? Do you need to take 10 deep breaths? Do you need, and all those great things. What we realized is that the first pillar of our five, and there could be 100, but five came from our research, is challenge your perspective. And in challenge your perspective, it happens before any disagreement even occurs. And so I'm asking people, leaders all across the world, of how are you consistently putting yourself in positions of learning where you're challenging perspective of things you don't know? One thing my mom used to do for me that I loved is that she would take us to events that we disagreed with growing up. And I'd be sitting in the audience like, Mom, we don't even agree with this. Like, why are we here? But what she was doing is she was planting these seeds of humanity that even when we disagree with people, there's a human being that's worthy of value and dignity in front of us. And so that's the first essence. It's a heart-based model, then the head, then hand, but it's how are you consistently challenging your perspective? Let me give you a practical way to do that. We challenge leaders to move from what we call an open door policy, which we know is a very passive approach, to an out the door policy. Open door is like, if you need me, I'm here. Out the door means you're intentionally going out to hear the stories of your people. And one way to do that is what we call one meaningful connection per week. Right? So what if you built into your calendar 15 to 20 minutes every single week to have meaningful conversations with people, to connect with them, hear their story, what brought you to our company, our organization, our community. And if that's too much, because it's 52.14 times a year, flip the W upside down, make it one meaningful connection per month. And maybe that's a longer lunchtime. But those are practical ways to lean in to start building up those empathy muscles so that you can have more difficult conversations when you disagree.
I have a question. So does that work on both sides? How do I do that for the pearl clutching employees who don't change or their perspective and aren't ready to receive the disagreement message? How do I manage those people?
That's a great question. I want to ask you a very important question I had to ask myself. Who is the only person that you and I can control?
Oh, well, okay. That's a great answer. Okay.
Yeah, our kids. And so the interesting, I'm joking. I tried it. I tried it. Yeah. I've tried it. That doesn't work.
I disagree.
But
yeah.
But the only person that we control is ourselves. So one of the things, there's two things that I had to realize. One is that I have to model the behavior, and I cannot force anyone to do anything. What I can do as a leader is I can create the best possible culture that invites people to engage in that same manner, in that same way. And so as a leader, one of the things that I challenge leaders to do is three things. One, to communicate that you want disagreement. You would have no idea how many leaders haven't communicated it. And so people come into this process or team meeting or sales meetings, and they're asking, well, maybe I just need to just be a yes person, right? Because that will get me promoted. That will get me seen, right? And so one, communicate you want disagreement. Number two, reward disagreement. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean like compensation or anything. I mean, if you're in a meeting, you're like, Audrey, thank you so much for bringing it up. That actually going to help us to get to something that I hadn't even thought of. That small moment of rewarding, verbal rewarding, allows people to realize like, oh, maybe this is something that this person prioritizes. And last but not least, is follow up on it. So if it leads to a change, if it leads to something, even if it's 2 months down the road, come back to that moment. Because what you're doing is you're creating a space for your team, your members, other people around you to be invited to share, because you're saying this is helping us with creativity, innovation, and ultimately business results, which is the ultimate goal of business.
One of the things that I had to be taught to do better was whenever I would get pushback like that, is like I would jump right into responding to the pushback, or if there was a problem being presented, trying to solve the problem. And one of the things that I had to be taught was to take a breath and to say, thank you for sharing that perspective with me, but thanking them, in the moment for for that. And I wonder if I'm alone in that. I don't think that I am, but it's like, where else do you go from there? So after you thank somebody then for their perspective, which is going to be different from you, are there some other things that you should be saying, to people when they're bringing that to the table?
Yeah, absolutely. But I would be very careful that this is not just an external thing. Yeah, we've learned methods like the sandwich method, right?
Right.
Where
Yeah.
people have like they know what you're doing. Like, did you go to a workshop for that? So I mean, before you even get to the thank you part, we challenge people. Pillar 2 is be the student, where you focus more on listening and learning than lecturing. And so even before you get to thank you for sharing your perspective, it could be like, oh, wow, tell me more about that. So now you're actually engaged in trying to understand, because sometimes even when somebody says something, we may have a different perception of what they mean.
Well, you got to
So
draw
it's
them
trying
out.
to clarify.
Yeah.
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
So
What's
being
pillar-
the student is helpful.
What's pillar 3? I want to get through all 5 of these in the time we
Yeah,
have.
real quick. Pillar 3 is cultivate your curiosity. And cultivate your curiosity is where we deeply listen to others, right? And so one of the practical ways to lean into that and focusing more on drawing curiosity rather than conclusions is we call stopping our double Dutch style of communication. And so if you don't know double Dutch, it's 2 ropes
Yeah,
and somebody's
right,
waiting to jump
jumping
in.
rope.
And that's often we jump in. And so in our conversations with people, we're just jumping in, right? We're like, oh, well, let me tell you why I disagree. Let me tell you what I know. And instead, utilizing our tool we created called the Power of 3, where you listen at least to the 3rd level of the conversation. So you may be asking 3 questions. You may be saying, oh, and if you don't know what to ask, tell me more. And that's the way that we cultivate our curiosity to make sure that we're asking questions and better understanding.
You could say, tell me more 3 times each time.
You could.
As they go. Okay.
100%, right?
That's great.
Because sometimes it's just inviting people, because we've conditioned people that we really don't care what you're thinking anyway. So people often just give a real small morsel, most people, not all. And then hey, tell me more about that. And they're like, oh, cool. They actually want to listen.
or what Andre tells me is like, when I want your opinion, I'll tell you.
I'll give it to you. Thanks, Lee.
Yes.
Number 4, go ahead.
Yeah, seek the gray. We know that there's many shades of that. And seek the gray is where it's not about it being black and white. It's about what's the gray. And when I did my MBA, I had a professor who had us read a book, a transformative book for me. It was called Dialogue, The Art of Thinking Together. And it wasn't about A and B. It was about how do we create C together. And so when I talk about seek the gray, it's how do we find this common ground? You're asking the question of like, all right, what do I actually agree with this person? Where might be the disagreement? And I want to take out of our vocabulary middle ground, because middle ground implies 50-50, and it's never, very rarely, often 50-50. But when we find common ground, I'll give you a great example from a big issue. Say, I want to go with this project, you want to go with this project. It's asking the question, now we have understanding, all right, is there a way that we can identify both of these projects? If not, what is our phased approach where we're actually be able to still make an impact? That's the aspect of common ground versus just constant competition.
That means you got to chunk it down. So first of all, it's not just a matter of, looking to where, I agree on this project, I agree on that project, but it's to chunk it down piece by piece and say, okay, what do we agree with on the smaller things? And that maybe helps create a foundation for us having a conversation about the bigger things, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And number 5?
Yeah, is agree to respect. And notice I didn't say agree to disagree, because oftentimes I've seen people do that very dismissively and very disrespectfully.
Yes.
Yeah. But agree to respect is where you choose to humanize the person. That it's always our choice. And I'm going to say something that's controversial. Even when they don't choose to respect you back.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the hardest things that I've run into with people is there's an expectation. It's things like respect must be earned, right? Or I'm going to match what you give me. And our challenge to people is one that I take on for myself is that what if our conversations are really just about planting seeds? What if it's not about that immediate conversation, right? Think about sales. How many times does the person need to hear a message or hear from us to hear, engage? It's not just one time, like, oh, we closed the sale, woo, right? No, like it may be 5 times. We followed up with them another year from now, or we sent them a gift, and all of these things. And that's the same thing in our conversations. What if we're just planting seeds with people? And the reason that that's important is because I've interviewed people and seen multiple stories and studies that have shown that sometimes in those moments, it's just critical for us to choose to respect them, to give things like Shan Zhao, the thank you because, and she came up with that as a method. Thank you because I've never heard it shared that way before. Or thank you so much because you mentioned 3 things and number 2 really stood out to me. Or simply, wow, Lee, thank you because I appreciate that you leaned into this conversation. Now, not once did I say I agreed with you, but I can always fully acknowledge you. And one way to fully acknowledge people is with thank you because.
One of your phrases that you use is, and I'll put these in the show notes, everybody. These 5 phrases you send that are great, for everyone to memorize. It seems like when you're in the most heinous, disagreeable situation as a leader, quote, you say, I would love to continue this conversation, but I want to ensure that I am respectful. Can we come back to it another day?
Yeah.
Oh, what's the scenario under which you should drop that bomb? And do you set up a meeting to discuss it right away so that it doesn't sort of go up into the ether, or what's the follow?
Yeah. So the situation where that comes into place, if you notice either yourself and or them, it turning into a place of dehumanizing, it turned into a place of disrespect. It's about anger, right? Now I'm very careful because we can be passionate. Sometimes we confuse passion for anger, and we have to be very mindful, right? It's one of those emotional intelligence moments of like, is this person just passionate, or are they now saying like, I think you're stupid, or that's dumb, right? Or that's why would you even think like when it starts becoming personal attacks, that's a moment where you say, hey, you know what? I'd love we are able to come back to this because I want to be able to maintain respect. Now, you notice I just did. Even if they're the one being disrespectful, what we be mindful of, especially as leaders, but it's individuals, is not putting the weight of it on them.
You didn't say so when we can be respectful. You said when I can be respectful.
Yes, and that's so pivotal.
Yes, that's a big difference.
Well, as leaders, we really can't. We don't have the option of giving to them what they give to us, or whatever. We going back to what a comment you said earlier, we have to model the behavior that we want to see in them, which means sometimes we have to swallow our pride or swallow whatever. Sometimes we just have to eat it, and I don't know, be the bigger person. Maybe is the wrong phrase to use, but it's like we don't have that option. It's like we have to do it the right way, regardless of what they're putting out there for us.
Oh, we do have that option. And I've heard many leaders exercise that option. However, in terms of being productive leaders, to your point,
right?
That's not that's important to do. But I want to push this back, not just for leaders, it's for the everyday person. Remember the statement I made around what if we're just seed planters? Let me give it to you in a different situation. Have you all ever been in a situation where you had a heated argument with someone, and then you came back and you apologized, and that person was like, and it was an authentic apology, not one that you learned, right? And they were like, you know what, I'm sorry too. And it was simply you choosing in that moment to be humble, to be vulnerable, that elicited a similar response. And it doesn't always happen, but that's the same thing that I encourage people to do in these moments of, hey, take ownership of what your part is. Don't put the ownership or onus on them, because immediately you'll draw a wall up. And immediately now it becomes a different type of argument. Oh, you don't think I can be respectful while we're having a different type of conversation? And now it's a snowball effect. And so always put the onus and emphasis on what you are going to do and what was important for you. But yes, to your point, Audrey, is bringing back the conversation and schedule a meeting. So if you're able to say, hey, I'd love to come back to this in a week. Is this okay? And if that person's like, no, I don't want to talk about it in a week, I want to talk about it now. This is where boundaries come in, right? You might not have a healthy conversation now. And so you may say, hey, I'd love to have this in a week. If you feel like, it's not able for us to engage in a week, let me know. Because I know if I engage now, it's not going to be a respectful one. And so I want to honor you. I want to honor us. And, when you want to talk about this, let me know. Because again, I come back to this thing. I am the only person I can control. And I've had situations where people have said, well, I want to talk about it now. And I just like, now it's not going to be effective. It's not going to be productive.
Or you could say,
I also imagine that this is extremely important, when we talk about your other area of expertise, which is inclusion, because if you're hiring people, whatever, with different perspectives who look differently than you do, dress differently than you do, certainly think differently than you do, whatever, then you have to be prepared for, reaping the benefits of that diversity of thought.
Yeah.
Right. It's not shutting it down, but actually opening it up and listening all the way through to the end. Because if you can't disagree respectfully yourself or whatever, you're going to lose all the benefits of having that diversity and actually then that would be an impediment to inclusion. Am I interpreting that right?
100%. All right. And the impediment to inclusion is you're losing out on innovation and creativity because people are spending more time trying to walk on eggshells, trying to say all the right things rather than feel like they can bring their full selves. Right, and their full selves in the wake of the organizational culture, right? So I'm not just saying, oh, I want to dress naked, so I'm coming to work naked. And I'm not talking about that type of full self, but I'm talking about the full self of like a person that's inquisitive. And so you may ask hard questions, but the culture may not have been one that's been used to a person who asks hard questions. It may have been just oh yeah, absolutely, Audrey thought about it. I think we should go with Audrey's idea. Right. But Audrey was like, hey, I want to do something different. And that person comes in like, wait a minute, I ask all the hard questions to my friends. This is just who I am. In my last company, I asked hard questions. And now when I ask the hard questions, I feel like I'm getting hand slapped. And so these are some of the things I think can help us for people to feel included, to feel like they have a sense of belonging. And those are ways to do it. So not only thank you because, but one really important thing, because we so often get this, is when do I share my perspective? Because I've done all the listening, I've cultivated curiosity, and some people are like, when do I share? And so I'm going to say something again that's going to be very extremely culturally controversial, and it's ask. Ask. And what I mean by that is once you've communicated and shared understanding, you know what, Lee, I thank you for sharing that because I better understand how you got here. Would you be open for me to share my perspective that might be a little bit different than yours? Now, what I've just done.
Who's going to say no to that, right?
Right. There are people who have said no. So to be very clear,
wow.
If they have said no, and often because it may be something that they have a high commitment to in that ideological divide, right?
You're not going to change your mind anyway at that point.
And that's why are we wasting our time, right? So in those moments, what I've tried my best to do, and not always successfully, is to keep the bridge open. And so, hey, if there ever is a moment where you want to engage again, let me know. Because I think, we can have a very valuable conversation. Now, that's boundary, but that's bridge. If they say yes, they've now psychologically opened themselves up and you prepared them or primed them that you're likely going to say something that might be slightly different, which is going to create less of a wall and more of an opportunity to engage.
That's much better than saying, is this the hill you really want to die on? We got about a minute left. Workmeaningful.com is Justin's website. And how do you want people to reach out to you?
LinkedIn. Love LinkedIn, okay. Justin Jones-Fosu, and or right on workmeaningful.com. You can find all my contact information there.
This was a wonderful conversation. And I think the topic is, especially with an election year, I mean, we could do another 20 minutes on that, but really for everybody to utilize this through every area of their life, it's wonderful. I'm going to try it on my husband and I'll let you know how it goes.
I love that. Try the power of three. The
and
power of three
Lee.
is the most pivotal, pivotal. So power of three.
So I get the last question usually on this. So this is my last question. What's the biggest mistake that leaders often make, in disagreeing respectfully with their direct reports?
I'm going to say something that's a little bit different. It's by not apologizing when they've disrespected them.
Ooh.
Because we all are going to disrespect. I disrespected somebody while writing I respectfully disagree. Right. So let me be very clear. This is not a perfection thing. But apologizing in that moment because it communicates vulnerability and communicates humility. And so I encourage leaders, if you have gone through a time where you disrespectfully disagreed with someone, whether it's a colleague or a direct report, to come back and apologize. That will actually give you more relational capital than you think.
That sounds great. Thanks, Justin, for your time. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at SalesFuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.